This Sunday, March 19th, 2023, Mickey's Toontown reopens at Disneyland after a year-long update. So today, I'm chatting with Imagineer Joe Lanzisero, who was the creative director for Mickey's Toontown when it opened 30 years ago in 1993. Listen as Joe discusses what a joy it was to build an entirely new land for Walt's original theme park. Plus, Joe chats about how a Winnie the Pooh attraction was being designed for Mickey's Toontown, how the Muppets were being considered to become part of the land, and the very simple reason as to why Mickey's Toontown was created in the first place. We discuss that and so much more, so buckle up and get ready as we rewind the clock to 1993 to discuss all things Mickey's Toontown.
Prepare for some insight. You've tuned in to an exclusive DCTC interview.
Hello, Joe, and welcome to Disney Coast to Coast. Thank you so much for being here.
Wow, thanks for having me, Jeff. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, now, of course, we're talking about Mickey's Toontown today, although you've worked on many projects with Disney and beyond. But I always wonder, how do you first hear about an assignment like this? Is it something that's simply assigned to you, or do you hear about it's happening and you kind of try and pitch yourself for it? How did you get involved with Mickey's Toontown?
I'll try to make the answer short because I spent a lot of time talking about it. I started my career as an animator at Disney Animation. I was really fortunate, went to Cal Arts with some now luminary animators, John Lasseter, John Musker, Brad Bird, Tim Burton. I think I can confidently say, I felt like an underachiever relative to all of them. But I did go on to get some really great opportunities, and I was able to do things not quite on the world-changing level that they did, but it was great to be in that class with great animators. And we learned so many things about Disney storytelling. We learned them directly from Walt's 9 old men. They were still around at the time. In fact, the whole purpose of the animation program was to replenish the ranks of the animators, the old animators who were retiring or in some cases passing away. So very fortunate to be there. Spent 8 years in Disney and Disney Animation. Started like everyone else as an assistant animator, then became an animator. And then towards the end of my time in animation, I was directing short little films, and many of them were for Imagineering. Stuff for the Seas Pavilion at Epcot. This is when Epcot was first opening. I did a little bit of animation on Figment. They were also working on Tokyo Disneyland, and there was a show there called Meet the World that had animation in it, so I did that. So I got to know some of the animators there. Well, again, to try to keep this short, through a series of circumstances, I ended up transferring from feature animation to Imagineering. And because of my background in animation, I kind of became the cartoon character guy. Some of the first things I did when I got over to Imagineering, we did a show. It was going to be a new Tiki show. It was going to be at the time when Jeffrey Katzenberg and Michael Eisner was there. They had all these celebrity friends. So they wanted the Tiki Birds to all be celebrities. So I quickly got to be known as the guy, and I even hate to say this, that was kind of like Mark Davis. And I say that because I revere Mark Davis. I put Mark Davis on a pedestal. For your listeners, I'm sure your listeners know who Mark Davis was. He also kind of followed the same career path, moved from animation to Imagineering, as a lot of the early Imagineers were also from animation as well. But nobody knows how to stage things better than Mark. Where to put things to make them easily communicated. But more than that, he understood the human condition and how to make things funny. So I kind of got earmarked as the guy who could do that too. And I have to thank Tony Baxter, because Tony was really instrumental, not only in getting me over to Imagineering, but seeing that quality in me and using that. I did some early work on what was the Haunted Mansion for Paris, that he wanted some Mark Davis like gags, and I did those, and he liked those. So the word was out, and then around, I was going to say it's probably around 88 yeah, 87 or 88, they were doing a thing down at Walt Disney World called Mickey's Birthday Land.
That would have been 1988. Yep.
88, yeah, it was in 88. Simultaneously, they were doing a thing at Disneyland. I think it was called
Afternoon Avenue.
The Avenue, right.
Yeah.
And both of them were about being guaranteed to see the characters. Up until both those projects, it was kind of ad hoc whether or not you could see Mickey. You could run into Mickey. You'd see Mickey in a parade. And I'm talking the walk-around characters, or as they are affectionately known as the Rubberheads, you know? And but there was no place where it was guaranteed that you could see them. And I guess it was very, very successful down at Walt Disney World that all of a sudden, oh, wow, I want to see Mickey. I can go to Birthday Land and I'm going to see Mickey and the characters. So they wanted to do a like version of that in Anaheim. And it started actually as with Disney Entertainment at the parks with a gentleman by the name of Dave Burkhart, who I'm probably going to mention Dave's name a number of times because you can't talk about the original Toontown without talking about Dave. Because Dave not only was working on the Disney Afternoon piece and was also working with his in-house team in Anaheim on this Mickey Land. I think, again, it was Tony Baxter that got wind of what they were doing and said, hey, you know what? We need to bring Dave up to Imagineering, make him an Imagineer, and then make this project a real Disneyland project. So they brought Dave up, and I got the call that said, hey, you're the cartoon guy. We want to partner you with Dave Burkhart, and together we want you guys to develop a new land for Disneyland. So you can imagine, here's a young boy. I think I was probably only 30 at the time, maybe 32. No, I was only 30, I think, at the time when I first got the assignment. You could have knocked me over with a feather. I grew up, loving Disney, obviously, was an animator, and dreamed of, when I came to Imagineering, dreamed of doing great things, but never did I think I would get the opportunity to design a whole new land at Disneyland. Especially, that's the park that Walt built. It's hallowed ground. Walt walked through, all those streets. Although I never got to meet Walt, like I said earlier, I was fortunate enough to have worked with the gentleman that worked directly with him, the 9-old man. So, wow, like I said, you could have knocked me over with a feather. So we got to work on, and originally it was going to be a smaller development. It was going to be basically an extension of what they were working on, what they had done in Florida was going to be just like the little Mickey's neighborhood, maybe Mickey's house and Minnie's house and something for Donald. It wasn't very ambitious originally.
At Magic Kingdom, yes, Mickey's Birthday Land had numerous iterations. It became Mickey's Starland, eventually Mickey's Toontown Fair, but the original concept was for it to be temporary. Was that ever discussion for Disneyland, or was it always, this is a home run for Magic Kingdom, like, let's make a permanent land?
Yeah, that was exactly it. They saw the success at Walt Disney World, the Magic Kingdom, and Disneyland management at the time really, really wanted this place where we can guarantee where guests are going to see Mickey. I remember Jack Lindquist was president of Disneyland at the time and was a huge supporter of what we did. Another great thing, getting partnered with Dave Burkhart, I can't say enough great things about Dave as a human being. He was probably one of the most honest, real people. And to be partnered with someone like that early in your career, he was a great mentor. There was only 10 years difference. He was only 10 years older than me, or is 10 years older than me. But he was definitely more of a father figure, he was very sage. And the important thing was he really was respected by Disneyland. Now, without getting too much into some of the politics of Imagineering and Disneyland at the time, Disney, there was always this kind of friction between Imagineering and Disneyland, and I think with the parks in general, because at that time in history, Imagineering had more power. Imagineering, they kind of drove the ship in terms of the development of projects for the parks. I think now, it's definitely shifted where the parks call the shots, say we want to do this, we're going to do this, and even have, I think, the last voice often in some of the creative choices as well. But, Imagineering at the time, we were king and whatever we said. And so, like I said, there was this friction, but Dave, had come from Disneyland and was respected by the operators, it really made our job a lot easier because, everybody trusted Dave. Like I said, he was just this really, salt of the earth kind of human being guy whose word was gold, and he was super smart and he knew how to communicate with people really well.
And what was your official title on this project?
I was a senior concept designer at the time, but I was the creative director.
Oh, the creative director. Very cool.
Dave was the show producer. At the time, they would always, and I think it started with Tony and Disneyland Paris, which we were working parallel. At the same time Disneyland Paris was being designed and built, we were working on the Toontown for Anaheim. And so Tony liked this model of pairing up a show producer and a creative director. And often the show producers could be creative or more project management types. And I was fortunate because in the case of Dave Burkhart, he in fact, I think he was an Imagineering before he went to Disneyland. So he kind of made full circle. Definitely a creative person. But there was never any competition between us. We both highly respected what each other brought to the process.
I love how much you recognized how big a deal working on a new land was, because that was one of my questions for you. I was like, did you get how it had been 20 years, over 20 years since Disneyland had gotten a new land. You literally broke through the berm to create a new land. It's quite incredible. Now, I had heard that this concept of a Toontown was, although more related to Roger Rabbit at the time, was going to be part of a Hollywood Land extension of Disneyland.
Right. First, they threw around this idea behind Main Street, which was originally, if you look at some of the early maps of Disneyland, there was an international street that was going to go back there between where Space Mountain is now and Main Street. And they initially looked at that and they talked about a Hollywood Land. Because remember, this is when Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg had come on, and they were, they were big Hollywood guys, loved Hollywood, were very much in tune and in touch with the whole Hollywood scene. And they had just started working on Roger Rabbit. A quick aside about Roger Rabbit, because it's a little ironic story. One of the last things I worked on at Feature Animation was experimental animation for Roger Rabbit. We had that same group that was making those small films for the parks. We were also tasked with doing some experimental animation on this new film idea that they were playing around with. And then I was actually going to work on the film and go to London when Richard Williams was brought on as the director. And again, through a series of circumstances, that didn't happen. In fact, that was one of a number of reasons why I decided to make the move over to Imagineering. So it was quite ironic that years later, I would be in charge of designing the first Roger Rabbit ride, and that Toontown had this huge effect on what we were doing. So now that I've gone off on that little aside, I'm going to come back to your question about Hollywood Land. Hollywood Land was going to be behind Main Street, and we didn't do a whole lot of work on it. And there was going to be a Roger Rabbit kind of experience. I think at one point it was a walkthrough, and at one point it was a ride. It didn't get developed very far. I think there were a number of reasons why the parks didn't want that. And I think, as you said, because the meet and greet aspect of what was happening down at Walt Disney World was so successful, they leaned more towards going with this land where the characters could live.
So was there ever, for me, I was a kid at the time, but when I heard Toontown, my first thought was always Who Framed Roger Rabbit? That was the introduction to the concept of Toontown. Was there any discussion, aside from the Hollywood Land thing, that Mickey's Toontown at one point could have been Roger Rabbit's Toontown, or was it always, no, we're going Mickey's Toontown here?
Actually, I'll tell you the genesis of Toontown if you go back, and I think even like if you look on my website, some of the early drawings that I did for Toontown, I did the first drawing of Goofy's house, and a few of the other iconic elements in the land, and fountains and things. All of them at the bottom say Mickey Land.
Oh.
Because the original name for the project, and it was for almost a year and a half, or maybe a year, it was Mickey Land. And we had, like I said earlier, we had developed it as basically Mickey's neighborhood, with Mickey's house, Minnie's house, Goofy's house, Donald's boat. We knew the tree house for Chip and Dale, and the little roller coaster for that. And then we were going to do like a little picnic area, food, like a little food court, like their little shopping area. Like, so it was more like Mayberry RFD. It was this cute little white picket fence and lawns. Then along comes Michael Eisner, and Michael Eisner saw Roger Rabbit as his Mickey Mouse. That was going to be his legacy with the Walt Disney Company. And especially then when Steven Spielberg got involved in Amblin Entertainment, and they brought Bob Zemeckis on to direct it. And it was pretty groundbreaking, too, what they were doing. And so it was a big deal. And I remember the day we got the call from then President Marty Sklar and said, well, he goes, I got good news and I got bad news for you. He goes, the good news is that they want to add Roger Rabbit to your project. I said, great. And he goes, the bad news is we may have to change the name. And I said, well, that's not so bad. And then it was actually Marty, and through a number of meetings because originally they just wanted to call it Toontown. But Marty and others, and I think it was Disneyland management at the time, like I said, John Lindquist, they really saw the value in the cute little neighborhood part of it. So in the end, it was actually kind of the best of both worlds. We got to keep the cute neighborhood, Mickey's neighbor, and we call it, in fact, when we had divided the project up into the downtown, the neighborhood, and the civic center. There were three areas. And in fact, we had art directors for each of them. And I'll talk a little bit about the art directors because they were amazing people. We were all a bunch of young kids at the time, too, and very fortunate to have been given that opportunity, as I mentioned earlier. So we got this assignment now. You got to add Roger Rabbit. And actually, we had played around with different dark ride ideas for it, and there was actually going to be a Winnie the Pooh dark ride first in that same spot where now the downtown area and the Roger Rabbit ride currently reside. And we got pretty far along on the Winnie the Pooh ride when we got the word that we were going to turn it into Toontown. But like I said, there was negotiating that happened, and it became Mickey's Toontown. So we kept the little neighborhood. And actually, I at the time, I kind of felt it was the best thing that could have happened because, I strongly believe in, you don't, without white, you don't have black, and without black, you don't have white. And the Mickey's Toontown part of it was so soft and cute. And the neighborhood gave it a little bit of grit because we definitely wanted to capture the kind of urban, I mean, Toontown in the movie, Toontown is kind of a dark and dangerous place, right? Of course, we couldn't make a dark and dangerous place in Disneyland, but it definitely had a little more of an edge to it. And then from a design standpoint, I remember working with the color designers. I said, well, this is great because now the land will have 3 distinct color palettes. We'll have the neighborhood, which the predominant color palette will be green and yellow and blue, the green being the grass and the green being the hills behind Mickey's house, which evoke kind of this friendliness to it. I said the Civic Center, just like, any city hall or Washington, D.C., the primary color is white, which is kind of a palette cleanser. It's always, I remember John Lasseter talking about in Toy Story, how important white was to the color palette there. And then the downtown, which now, had to reflect a little bit of the grittiness and the edge of the Roger Rabbit film. We were going to use brick colors, warm colors, and kind of cement colors, more neutral colors. So it worked out great. Now we had this wonderful land that the result of that, just like when you do a dark ride, you always think about, you want to have a small room, you want to have a big room, you want to have a dark room, you want to have a light room, you want to have a blue room, you want to have a red room. And the result of that is that it makes you feel like you've really gone someplace and you've seen a lot more than you've actually experienced. And so it was kind of that design philosophy that we used with the color palettes that made Toontown, I think, a lot richer and feel a lot bigger than it actually was. It was only 3 acres total.
So when you got the assignment, obviously part of the job was this is going to be a place to guarantee to see the characters. You got to work Roger Rabbit into it. But was there anything else that like you had to do? Did it have to look a certain way? Did it need to have certain other things in it? Or was that very much up to you?
It was kind of up to us, but one thing, we had to have the Meet Mickey experience. And again, through discussions with Disneyland, they wanted it to be more than just, going into a room and seeing Mickey. And that's why we really developed Mickey's house, the movie barn, the pre-show with the little film, and that we had 4 different meeting rooms. They wanted the Meet Mickey experience to be the premier experience for meeting Mickey Mouse, because he's the icon of the company. He's Mickey Mouse, so and then the same with the dark ride, because there were so many other dark rides in the park. I think it was the 5th or 6th dark ride. We really pushed to make it different. And again, there was Tony Baxter who pushed us to say, hey, what kind of twist or spin could you put on it? And we literally took that literally, and we came up with the idea. I think it was, I forget who in the team, came up with the idea of, we actually went down to Disneyland after hours, and we took the bogie from the Pinocchio ride, took the ride vehicle off it, left just the bogie and put a teacup on it. And after hours went through Pinocchio, spinning it to see what effect it would have in a traditional dark ride. We learned a lot about, how we were going to have to stage things and the surprises guests we got. But that was important to making it different from the other dark rides in the park at the time. I don't think I lost your question. What was your question? It was about,
were there any like mandates as far as the look of it or anything like that?
I think from programmatically, we had to have a premier Meet Mickey experience. We wanted to have this differentiated dark ride. But the other thing we really, 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 really wanted was to be able to make people feel like they walked into a cartoon. We gave people agency. Now that's kind of common in a lot of what Disney and other parks do, But we were the first ones to really say, when you walk into Toontown, you're going to be a cartoon character. You're going to be able to interact with the experience on a whole variety of levels. Since we came up with, you could push a plunger and blow up the fireworks factory. You could push buttons on the mailboxes and hear the characters talking. You would step on a manhole and hear characters talking with you, opening up the mailbox. I mean, we wanted the land to be alive. I recently saw the new Nintendo World, that Super Mario Nintendo World that Universal did here at Hollywood. And it's great, and I loved it. And I was feeling a little, not jealous, but because at the time, we didn't have the budget, and B, I don't think we had the technology to make the land really be alive. I mean, especially when you watch the Roger Rabbit movie, one of the coolest things when Bob Hoskins as Eddie Valiant goes through that tunnel and comes out on the other side. All the buildings are moving. I mean, how great that would have been. But our challenge then, so 2 things. One, and these were our own challenges that we put on. One was that everybody that came in the land had to feel like they were attuned, that they could interact with the experience, and that everything had to be consistently visually look like it was drawn. So I remember this was going to be a big challenge because basically, we said there's going to be no right angles, no straight lines. And I remember the concept architect that was assigned to the project said, you can't do this. There's no way you can do this. You just, it's impossible to do. And I credit a great production designer, construction guy, John Olson. And John and we were fortunate because Euro Disneyland was just winding down. So a lot of the technical people painters, rockwork sculptors that were working on Euro Disneyland, their next assignment when they came back from Paris, we were fortunate enough to get them. One sculptor was I'm trying to remember his name, but he was great at being able to make these things look soft and round. So we did a mock-up, and what we had to do was first build, because steel and wood all has to work at right angles to create the structure. So basically we built the buildings as kind of a straight looking building and then skin them much the same way they make rock work, mountains to look like, rock, by putting the mesh and the concrete over them. We did that for these buildings so that each one is, like actually a sculpture. And I remember John Olson working with Don Carson, who was one of the art directors assigned to he was doing the downtown area. And Don had done that drawing of the firehouse, and we built the firehouse at Disneyland. And I remember just coming out, and again, it was another one of those moments where I almost cried. I go, "We're going to do this. We're going to be able to do this." They did it, which was super exciting. So those were the things, Premier Mickey experience, differentiated, cool, dark ride, and making the land look like it was alive, like you were stepping into a cartoon, and that you could interact in the land like you were a cartoon yourself.
I will say the interactive nature of it still works to this very day, because I did something I honestly don't get to do super often. I go to Disneyland a lot, but I don't go with kids very often. And I recently went with my 10-year-old niece, and we went and checked out the little area that's currently open because it's under construction at the moment. But that whole downtown area with the mailbox and the telephone you can pick up and the prison and the firework plunger and all that stuff is still there. And my 10-year-old niece was like loving that stuff. And it was that classic thing of, you pay all this money to get into a theme park with these really extensive rides and stuff. And she just wanted to sit on that phone and listen to the cartoons on the other end of it and all that stuff. So like, it's still working beautifully today.
Jeff, that warms my heart to hear you say that. I mean, it's a lot like, in fact, I thought the analogy we're going to use was like the kid on Christmas morning who unwraps the box that has his bike in it, puts the bike aside, and then goes and plays in the box. And actually, we thought a lot about that because a lot of what you just described and what we were trying to do is create a place that really engaged kids' imaginations.
Yeah, well, it's working. It worked, and it's still working, is what I'll say with that. And I'm just going to throw a little dig in. Listen, I love Super Nintendo World as well, but I'll just say all the stuff that's in Mickey's Toontown, you don't have to pay an upcharge for a power-up band to enjoy it. Just going to say that and put that there. I want to talk about the original storyline real quickly. I'm going to read it. The storyline behind Mickey's Toontown is, it was a hidden toon suburb that Mickey Mouse had moved to in 1930 to keep in touch with his humble Midwestern roots, with his friends following soon after. When Walt Disney was looking for a location to build Disneyland, Mickey pointed him toward a large orange grove nearby for him to build his park. After the park opened, Mickey and his friends would travel between their Toontown homes and Disneyland to meet the countless guests that visited the park, before eventually deciding to open their hometown to the public by digging a tunnel through the berm. They literally expanded Disneyland to make this happen. So who's responsible for this backstory?
Usually, story leads, and everything I did, I always, story should lead the design. The story is either it drives all the design. And our story was we were creating the land where the characters lived. It was just that simple. That more expanded backstory that you just read was that came out of Disneyland marketing, and I thought it was okay. I thought it was good. It didn't change in any way the core experience that we created. I think it worked for Disneyland marketing as a great way to connect Disneyland, Walt, and Toontown, all together, make kind of a bigger story than it actually was.
Now, of course, you created all these different homes for the characters. Are there any in particular you want to spend time talking about? Do you have any favorites of those character homes?
Wow, that's kind of like, asking a parent who has four kids which kid is their
Well,
favorite.
so you worked on all of them then. Like there wasn't one that was
Oh
your
yeah, because I was the overall
Okay.
the overall art director for the entire project.
Okay, well, I'm going to start with a very specific question about Minnie Mouse's house. This is really weird and niche, and the part of me is like, I don't even know if you'll know this, but then part of me is like, you must know this. Do you know what I'm going to say about a book in Minnie's house? Do you know what I'm getting at?
I gave the art directors freedom to have fun.
Okay.
So let me tell you, when we were designing the land, we were in the same building. We were not in the main WDI building. They moved us over to because we were working. We were in Tony Baxter's portfolio because he was in charge of Disneyland. So we were in the same building where they were doing Paris, Disneyland at the time, Disneyland Paris. We were just off in the back corner of the building. And like I said, we were all of us were pretty green behind, pretty wet behind the ears, very green, never done this kind of stuff. And we were just having a really great time. I would host almost every day we had cartoon lunches. And either we would and this was in the day of VHS. So we were either watching old Disney cartoons, which there were plenty of them, but we also loved Warner Brothers cartoons, which of course the Warner Brothers cartoons were kind of the genesis of the look and feel of the Roger Rabbit ride. But there was also this deviant cartoon at the time called Ren and Stimpy.
Oh, yes.
On Nickelodeon that was kind of really out there, but it also just celebrated a lot of crazy cartoon tropes. It was a little bit of Wile E. Coyote. It was a little bit of Tex Avery. And I loved the energy and feeling in those. And I remember telling the team, I go, we want to get that same fun energy into the land. And so, we would come and have these cartoon lunches. So the book In Minnie's House, I think I know which one you're talking about. All that grew out of just our desire to have fun with the project.
So the book that I'm speaking of, it's called Elvis, What Happened?
What happened?
Whose idea? I mean, so first of all, if you're in Minnie's house, as you get ready to exit the back door, on your right side, there's a bookshelf, and the spine of the book reads, Elvis, What Happened? And
So
I love that, first of all, you knew what I was talking about. Please explain.
I think I just did. We were just a bunch of kids having fun. We wanted to be a little deviant. And I remember the woman who was in charge of Minnie's house, this lady, Jenny Barrucio, great designer. And she had this thing for Elvis.
Is it even a real book? Do we know? Is that a real book title?
No, it's not. We just made it up. Yeah.
I love it.
And I'm glad you. Yeah, I often go. Do people even pay attention? Do people go that deep into the details on these things?
There's about like 3% of us, I would say, that do, and trust me, there's plenty I miss as well. But as you were talking about those cartoon lunches, that brings up a good point. Obviously, there are a lot of Mickey Mouse shorts and, Goofy shorts and whatever. When it came to designing Mickey's house, did you have to go back to any of that sort of reference material and use that as inspiration?
Absolutely. What we discovered that we initially started researching, what does Mickey's house look like? What does Goofy's house look like? And we went back and watched all those old shorts, and surprise, surprise, there was never an establishing shot like in a movie, or at the time I was using the example of the Golden Girls. That was the popular TV show at the time. And every week they started with that establishing shot of the Golden Girls house, which they built on the back lot in Florida, and so, oh, they live here. There was never that establishing shot for the characters. So what we resorted to was having these sessions, often after the cartoon lunch or before the cartoon lunch, where we just, after watching the cartoons, talked about the characters. And really, really, I said it's very important because I came from character animation. And in character animation, it's about, creating a believable character, a character that people, even though it's drawn out with pencil and paper, at least in those days, they believe that character is really living, really breathing. It's got eccentricities, it's got likes, it's got dislikes. So we really got deep into understanding who the characters were, and then said, well, then And I remember we had a little bit of an argument with some of the executives, both in Imagineering and Disneyland, about Mickey's house, because some of them saw Mickey as, he's the iconic, he's the figurehead of the company, super famous, and that he should have more of a, they wanted like more of a house on a hill, a little more Hollywood like. And I said, no, that's not who Mickey is. Mickey is every man. Mickey is, the leader of the gang, and he's humble and he's resourceful. So we really understood. And so Mickey would live in, and I remember at the time we looked at some different, Southern California architectural type Spanish houses, the little Tudor houses, and somebody brought in Pasadena craftsman houses, because the craftsman houses were about the warmth of the handmade quality of them and the scale of the particular design elements. Just everything about it felt warm and friendly and welcoming. And that's who Mickey was. And if this was going to be the premier Meet Mickey experience in the park, we wanted to make sure that the front door leading into this experience, and in this case, the house, was something that was very warm, very welcoming, and had this, in animation, we learned about appeal, how important it was to make characters and situations appealing. And I remember the 9 Old Men always talking about how even the Disney villains, they're always appealing looking. They're not ugly. Captain Hook wasn't ugly. Maleficent, she was actually kind of beautiful and elegant in her own way. When you think about the Disney villains, you want to look at them. And that was this whole idea of appeal, to create something that people want to look at, and has some human element to it that connects you to them in some way. So that became very important in the design of the houses, and in particular Mickey's house.
One of the cool things about the houses when it initially opened, that unfortunately through the years kind of started going away, was just how interactive they were. Goofy's house was a bounce house. Chippendale's treehouse had like a slide and a ball pit. Donald's boat had slides and stuff inside there. Were you told like, hey, we want kind of a playground element to this, or was that your team's decision?
That was actually part of the criteria too, because I think at the time, Universal had Feifel's Land, where, they had slides and crawl nets and ball pits and things. And Disneyland didn't have anything like that for little kids. It's a place where little kids could go and burn off energy. So I think one of the design criteria is, beside, having this premier Meet Mickey experience and this differentiated dark ride, was to, create more active play for kids. Now, the big lesson we learned, and why so many of those elements are no longer there, was, Disneyland on an average day gets 20 to 40,000 plus people. And it's one thing when you're putting a slide in a playground where, you maybe get a half a dozen or dozen kids an hour, playing on stuff. We were getting 1,000 people an hour. And so early on, there were some injuries that happened because of that. I mean, Disneyland did their best to manage the operations of the slides and the ball pits and things. But, and second, and, the reality is, Disney's kind of a target for litigation for people that want to sue, for whatever bad reasons they have. So I remember we had to go back, and initially the first slide that we had to change was we had a boiler slide in Donald's boat, and it was a enclosed slide, and you really couldn't see. The people at the top that were getting in couldn't see if the people at the bottom had moved out of the way. So Disneyland asked us to go back, and I remember we had to rework that to make it more open so the guests could see what was going on. And then little by little, they had to get rid of the other slides because they proved to be, a little too dangerous. The one thing I was sad to see go was Goofy's bounce house, which was so crazy and fun. And every kid, I remember having the meeting where I said, every kid goes to that, when they go to that birthday party and they see that bounce house, their eyes light up. They love going. And we just thought that, and it was so perfect for Goofy too. This crazy house where you could go in. And remember how Mom would tell you, don't jump on the couch. We said, well, let's create a place where the kids can jump on the couch. You know?
That's awesome. Now, we talked a bit about Roger Rabbit's cartoon spin, but when the land first opened, Roger Rabbit's cartoon spin didn't come along till 94, and the land opened in 93, so there was really only one ride, and that would be Gadget's Go Coaster. And Gadget, of course, is from Chippendale Rescue Rangers, which was one of those Disney afternoon shows, and as I mentioned, the predecessor to Mickey's Toontown was Afternoon Avenue near It's a Small World, which really celebrated the Disney afternoon TV shows.
Right.
Was there ever conversation about, hey, this Afternoon Avenue thing worked, it's great promotion for our TV shows, let's fit some Rescue Rangers and or other Disney afternoon shows? Because I know even Mickey's Birthday Land in Magic Kingdom was very much considered Duckburg from DuckTales. Was there talk about that, or how did Gadget end up in there if not?
Yeah, it's exactly as you said. At the time, Jeffrey Katzenberg had a very strong voice in a lot of what was happening at the studio and was really behind the Disney afternoon and those characters. So, in fact, at one point we had more Disney afternoon in the land. And I'm trying to remember, there was a character in the Rescue Rangers. Oh God, I'm getting old. I can't remember. Who had an airplane. You remember?
Oh, yeah. I'm blanking on his name. Oh my God.
Yeah. Well, so we had a little go around, like a Dumbo ride based on him. And then of course the Gadget's Go Coaster. And I think one of the merchandise shops was actually also, but then when the whole Roger Rabbit thing came in, we said, we're getting too many flavors here. We got to keep it simple, and too many stories. It's the land where the characters live. There's a neighborhood, there's a downtown, there's a civic center, and then trying to add all these other little references to the Disney afternoon. It started just to muddy it a bit. But Jeffrey, I remember, was pretty adamant about wanting at least having the Gadget in there, both because of she was also kind of a role model to young girls too. A young girl, she was an inventor, and it actually worked. It worked well in the land because she built everything out of found objects, so made it fun for that roller coaster to be able to use all of little bits of toys, bits of mechanical things that she found that worked well as a design, kind of to kind of lead and drive that design there.
Very cool. One of the most iconic things about Mickey's Toontown and the original marketing, I guess there are actually two. There's the Hollywood-like letters in the hills that say Toontown, and there's the Jolly Trolley, which was a really fun trolley in the land. How did those come about, and how early on in the process kind of were they brought in?
Well, actually, one of the early sketches for Mickey Land had Mickey Land. In fact, there's some pictures I probably have somewhere of our first iteration of the model, and we had the Mickey Land lettering on the hills because we love the whole lot. And I think this was a throwback to when they were talking about doing the Hollywood land behind Main Street. They were going to have the hills with the Hollywood land on. So that was always kind of a natural for that. The Jolly Trolley was our attempt. Because kinetics were so important. Earlier, I was saying how I love what they did at Nintendo Land because the land you walk in and it's alive, it's moving, and we wanted to have something kinetic in there. Like I said, we originally had that little airplane ride, which then later became Gadget's Go Coaster, which was kinetic. That was also the reason for the fountains. We had, the Mickey fountain and the Roger Rabbit fountain again because the water is kinetic. We wanted to keep things that made the land feel like it wasn't static, that it was alive.
I love the windmills at Goofy's house too, or the little wind chimes and stuff.
Yeah, all the those crazy little. Those were whirly gigs. Yeah, those were really fun. And the trolley again, and it was Tony Baxter who challenged us. He said, the trolley, should be more than just a ride. It should in itself, again, be a cartoon thing. And we challenged the engineers to come up with, if you remember, the trolley had this wobbly kind of back and forth kind of movement to it, which was a real challenge for them. I was sad when that went away. And that was during the Paul Pressler years when they were trying to cut back on maintenance. And I guess it was I wouldn't say it was a maintenance nightmare, but it did take a lot of maintenance to keep it going. They used the excuse that it was also dangerous, because it was, went through the middle of the land. I quickly pointed out, well, you've had horse-drawn carriages and little cars going up and down Main Street since the park opened.
Yes, indeed.
And then a few years after they closed it, they added the red car to Disney's California Adventure. But whatever, these things happen. It was a moment. You know what? I'm going to say I'm not all that familiar with what they're changing with the new Toontown that's opening up, because I always like to look forward. I'm not a Buddhist, but I like Eastern philosophy, and there's, in Buddhism, it's all about, everything's going to change. Nothing remains the same. There's this temporal quality. We're all here and then we're all gone, and I felt like, our Toontown had a pretty good run, and whatever they decide to do with it, great. I hope they maintain that same crazy spirit of, walking into a cartoon that, that we put into it. But I was also just pleased that it's still there. I mean, because things come and go in the parks. And I remember at one point I even heard rumor that, they might be tearing Toontown out and they were going to put the Star Wars land back there, or at least the expansion for Star Wars land. Ironically, one of the last things I worked on before I left Disney was the early iterations of the Runaway Train, Mickey and Minnie's, right? Yeah. So anyway, I'm happy that they're rejuvenating it, and there's going to be a whole new generation of kids that are going to get to experience at least part of what I did, and that makes me very happy.
Yeah, I always say that theme parks kind of live in this world somewhere between film and theater, where film is forever and theater is extremely fragile. And I feel like theme parks feel like forever, but the reality is we see lands or rides or whatever come and go in our lifetime. It's been 30 years with the original for the most part. So yeah, it's getting updated. It's still there. You mentioned Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, which is a blast. Were there any other plans for more rides in that park or in that land when you were working on it?
There was a crazy moment, and it was just that, a moment where, again, this was the world we were living in at the time with Michael Eisner and the movie guys. They were romancing Jim Henson to buy his company. And I had actually worked on, I can't remember, it was simultaneous with the time we were working on Toontown or before Toontown. I worked on a concept because down in Florida, they were with the Muppet Land that they built. There was going to be more. They had more ambitious plans. There was going to be a dark ride in it, and I worked on the dark ride for the Muppet Land. And at one moment, I remember them saying, "Hey, can we put the Muppets back there as well?"
Like as part of Toontown?
As a separate thing, again, like where the Roger Rabbit half was going to be. There was going to be kind of a Muppet world, and then the Mickey world on the other side. And being good soldiers that we were, we saluted and said, yeah, we'll try to make that work. But then, as it turned out, tragically, Jim passed away, and the whole deal, at least at that time, fell apart. And so I remember getting the call. I remember hearing, Jim died, and it wasn't but a few hours later we got the call and said, no, you're going back to your original idea for the land as you guys had conceived it.
Huh. I'm a huge Muppet fan, but I feel like that's a very separate thing from Toontown.
Yeah.
Like Muppets are tangible, Mickey and...
Well, the Muppets live in the real world.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
The Muppets live in New York. They live in, they go to Los Angeles. They go to Hollywood. I mean, the Muppets live in the real world, and Mickey lives in the cartoon world. And that was always going to be the big challenge of that.
Yeah, that's one of those things that I love that. First of all, I saw in your portfolio that you worked on the Great Muppet Movie Ride, and I was like, oh, this is a whole separate conversation we're going to have because...
Happy to come back and talk about that on another day.
Oh, yeah, that is like a dream attraction that I wish existed. But yeah, no, I think that's the perfect way to wrap up the conversation. Mickey's Toontown, doing well at Disneyland. Thank you for it. I think it's kind of, a rite of passage for so many kids. And you're right, it's that whole idea that it started with, we need a place to guarantee this is where people can meet the characters. I do remember being a kid and sometimes having a hard time finding Mickey or one of the characters. So it did its job. It did its job well. It's had some changes through the years. It's going through a big change right now, but none of this would exist if it wasn't for you and your team. So thank you very much.
And again, a big shout out to the team. I mean, I always say, I stand on the shoulders of giants, all these things, all the projects you do, they're so collaborative. It takes so many people. My name is often brought up, when they talk about Toontown, but, I was the guy that got to take the bow at the end, but I was bowing for all the incredible artists and technicians, that really stretched themselves and stretched their imaginations. And we worked tirelessly on that. I remember we would be in that in our building over there on Chastain Street, often on weekends, late into the night. But it was all driven by our passion and our love for the product and what we did and got to do.
Very cool. Now, Joe, is there anything you're working on now that you can bring up or want to bring up, or is there anything you want to plug before we get going here?
Oh, I'm in a great place right now. I kind of split my time. I'm kind of semi-retired. I'm still picking up projects here and there, I'm doing all over the world, doing things here and there. I don't have to go looking for work. People usually call me and ask me to come in and do this and that. And I'm really enjoying that. But I split my time between here and Spain. I got a second home in Madrid, and I love to travel. And I recently got offered from another company to take on a very big role. And you know what? I did that. I enjoyed that at the time. And now I'm at a place in my life where it's just time to be a little more selfish and enjoy me. I got 2 grandkids. I love going and spending time with my grandkids. So it's a different kind of life now.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to us about Mickey's Toontown. This has been a true delight.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Jeff. And you were a great interviewer. You had great questions. I really, really enjoyed this time together. Thank you much.
Now, folks, I don't know about you, but I have vivid memories of being a kid, watching Disney Channel, and seeing a music video from a live concert shot inside of Mickey's Toontown. The song was called Rockin' Toontown, and it was sung by Craig and Company. I think of this tune literally every time I walk through the gates into Mickey's Toontown. If you aren't familiar with it, take a moment to check out the music video. It's in the show notes, and it's a hoot. If you enjoyed my conversation with Joe, I also suggest you check out his website, as it's full of great content. His career truly is impressive. I'll include that link in the show notes as well. Thanks for tuning into this episode. Don't miss any future episodes by subscribing and following Dizney with a Z, coast to coast on your favorite podcast app where episodes are available 24/7. If you're a longtime listener of the show, thank you. And if you have the means, consider supporting the show over on Patreon. By joining Disney Coast to Coast's Patreon membership, you'll gain access to extra bonuses, including live stream Ask Me Anythings, one of which is happening this Tuesday, March 21st, 2023. Take a look at all that's available by clicking the Patreon link in this episode's description, and thank you for considering. Until next time, anything you need can be found in this episode's description. From additional information and links discussed in this episode found in the show notes, to the DCTC hotline where you can leave a voicemail and be heard on a future episode, contact info to reach me, access to the show's official website, some free gifts from me to you, and so much more. So be sure to check out this episode's description. Other than that, folks, have a magical day. Bye!